everything changed.
The first Sherman burned so fast the crew inside never screamed because there was no time to draw breath. The explosion came from nowhere, a white-hot flash tearing through the hedgerow-lined road in Normandy like the snap of a god's fingers. One moment the tank rumbled forward, steel treads chewing wet earth. The next it was a coffin of flame. The German 75mm round punched clean through the Sherman's frontal armor and ignited the ammunition rack. The turret lifted half a foot off the hull before slamming back down like a judge's gavel. Private Eddie Kowalski, riding on the back deck of the next tank, felt the heat wash over his face. He didn't hear the blast. He felt it deep in his chest, in his teeth, in the hollow behind his eyes. Another Sherman. Gone. They had a name for it now, Ronson. Lights every time. The tank column halted in confusion. Smoke curled upward in a greasy black pillar visible for miles. Somewhere ahead, unseen German gunners were already adjusting their sights, calm and methodical. Panthers. Maybe a Tiger. The crews didn't know which was worse. Inside his own Sherman, Sergeant Bill Hanrahan clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. He'd seen this too many times since landing in France. Shermans weren't bad tanks, not useless, not the death traps German propaganda claimed, but against German armor in a head-on fight, they were brutally outmatched. Thinner armor, underpowered guns, gasoline engines that turned penetration into infernos. They were fighting a war of speed and numbers against an enemy built for killing tanks. And the men inside knew it. Every time the order came to advance, a question flickered through their minds, unspoken but shared. Is this the one? Patton knew before anyone said it. General George S. Patton stood apart from most commanders because he listened not just to reports, but to the tone of them. By the summer of 1944, his Third Army was poised to explode across France, but Patton was already furious. Casualty numbers from armored units were higher than he found acceptable. Tank crews were dying too fast, too often, and in ways that felt avoidable. He paced in front of a situation map one night, riding crop tapping against his polished boot. The Germans, he snapped to his staff, have built tanks to kill tanks. We have built tanks to win wars. That difference is killing my boys. Patton wasn't blind to logistics or doctrine. He understood why the Sherman existed, why it had to be lighter, easier to transport, simpler to repair. But doctrine didn't burn alive when a Panther round punched through steel. Men did. Reports kept coming in. Crews were improvising in the field, sandbags stacked on hulls, spare track, links welded onto glacis plates, concrete poured wherever it would stick. Officially, this was discouraged. Unofficially, Patton let it happen. The welders came at night at a motor pool outside of ranches. Welders worked under tarps and blackout conditions. The light from their torches flickered like silent lightning, throwing monstrous shadows across the hulls of waiting Shermans. German steel Panzer IVs armor, Panther track shirts, scavenged plate, torn from wrecks, was being cut, shaped, and welded onto American tanks. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't standardized, but it was hope. Corporal Luis Ramirez watched sparks dance as a slab of enemy armor fused to the front of his tank. Feels wrong, his loader muttered, like stealing a dead man's coat. Ramirez shook his head. Feels like stealing his shield. They called the modified Shermans iron patterns, a half-joking, half-reverent nickname whispered between crews. Each extra plate of steel was a small act of defiance, a refusal to die quietly inside a burning box. Patton heard the name and didn't correct it. German eyes noticed across the lines. German generals studied battlefield reports with growing irritation. Shermans were not supposed to survive direct hits. Yet here they were rolling forward after glancing blows, shrugging off. Rounds that should have penetrated. Not always, not perfectly, but enough to matter. General Hasso von Manteuffel reportedly slammed his fist on a map table. "They've armored their damned coffins," he growled. "Those are no longer standard Shermans." Another officer muttered the name they'd begun using. Eisener Patton. Iron Patton. It wasn't admiration. It was alarm. First test of the iron, the real test, came outside the town of Coutances. Hanrahan's tank, now wearing a jagged plate of panther armor welded to its nose, led the column. The hedgerows closed in tight. Visibility was a nightmare, perfect kill ground. Then the shot came. A solid clang, metal on metal, but no penetration. Inside the tank, everyone froze. No fire, no scream of shrapnel, no burning gasoline. Hanrahan swallowed. "Driver," he said quietly, "keep moving." They advanced through fire that would have killed them weeks earlier. The armor wasn't invincible, but it bought seconds. And in tank combat, seconds were everything. They destroyed 2 German positions before pulling back. When they climbed out afterward, hands shaking, Ramirez slapped the welded plate like it was a living thing. "You saved us," he whispered. Patton made his choice word spread fast. Crews wanted armor. Welders worked around the clock. Official channels pretended not to see. Patton received a message from higher command questioning the modification. He ignored it. Later, he wrote in his diary, "If welding enemy steel to my tanks keeps my men alive long enough to kill the enemy, then we will weld until there is nothing left to weld." The war was changing. The Shermans were changing. And so was the enemy's fear. The iron patterns were coming, and this was only the beginning. Normandy was not a battlefield, it was a trap. The hedgerows rose like walls of living stone, ancient earth packed tight and crowned with thorny green. From above, they looked harmless. From inside a Sherman, they felt like the inside of a coffin slowly being lowered. Sergeant Bill Hanrahan learned to hate silence. When birds went quiet, it meant German armor was close. His iron pattern rumbled forward at a crawl, welded panzer steel clanking softly with every vibration. The added weight made the engine strain, the transmission complain, but none of the crew minded. They trusted that ugly slab of enemy armor more than any manual or assurance from high command. The ambush came fast. A Panther emerged from concealment barely 30 yards away, its long 75mm gun already aligned. It fired before Hanrahan could shout a warning. The round struck the welded plate dead center. The impact felt like being punched by a freight train. Inside the tank, men were thrown against steel, teeth cracked together, ears rang. Smoke filled the compartment, but the armor held, still alive. The driver screamed, half laughing, half sobbing. Hanrahan didn't waste the miracle. Fire! The Sherman's gun roared. The shot struck the Panther's lower hull, igniting fuel. German crewmen bailed out, silhouettes against flame. Afterward, Ramirez vomited behind the tank. Not from fear, from relief. The psychology of steel survival changed men. Tank crews developed rituals touching welded plates before battle, whispering names into the steel, treating the iron pattern like a living guardian. They knew the armor wasn't perfect. They knew Panthers and Tigers could still kill them. But belief mattered. Fear became sharper, more focused. Instead of inevitable death, there was now a chance. German gunners noticed. They adjusted aim points, lower hull, turret rings, tracks. The duel was evolving. And Normandy drank blood from both sides. German command responded with methodical cruelty. Panther crews were ordered to wait longer, aim lower, fire twice. Anti-tank teams armed with Panzerfausts stalked the iron patterns through villages, crawling through rubble, waiting for engines to pass overhead before striking at vulnerable rear armor. The battlefield became a chessboard soaked in oil and fire. American crews adapted too. Infantry rode closer to tanks, clearing threats. Smoke screens thickened. Artillery walked ahead of advances. The iron patterns spearheaded assaults once deemed suicidal. General Patton watched casualty curves flatten, not vanish. Flatten? That was enough. Behind closed doors, he pushed logistics officers to quietly allow welding units to continue. Replacement tanks arrived already bearing scars. Factory Shermans turned into field-forged hybrids. German generals fumed. They have turned inferiority into stubbornness, one reported. They will not die when they should. Iron Patton had become more than a nickname. It was doctrine. The breakthrough came near Saint-Lô. Weeks of grinding combat had stalled both sides. Then Patton unleashed everything. Iron Pattons led the charge at dawn, artillery screaming overhead, engines howling under extra weight. Panthers fired. Tigers roared. Shermans burned. But fewer. The line broke. As Hanrahan's tank rolled through the breach, he realized something profound. For the first time since Normandy, the Germans were retreating from Shermans. From them. And if you're gripping this moment the way those crews gripped steel handholds inside burning hulls, make sure to hit subscribe. There's more ahead, and the story only gets darker before it ends. The advance accelerated. France began to open. The Iron Pattons chased a collapsing enemy east. German soldiers whispered that Patton's tanks were immune to fire, that American crews welded fallen enemies onto their hulls as trophies. Fear multiplied. It wasn't true, but fear didn't need truth. By the time the Third Army reached the German border, resistance was brittle. Fuel shortages crippled German armor. Crews abandoned tanks intact. Iron Pattons rolled past them. Hanrahan stood atop his tank one evening, staring at the welded armor, chipped, cracked, blackened. It had saved them, but at a cost. Men still died. Friends didn't make it. Steel couldn't stop grief. When the war ended, reports were written. Official histories minimized the welded armor. Doctrine reasserted itself. Logistics took credit. But the crews remembered. Iron Patton was never invincible. It never needed to be. It only needed to give men a few extra seconds inside hell. German generals in post-war interviews admitted the truth. It was not the armor alone, one said. It was the will inside those tanks. Patton understood that better than anyone. Steel didn't win the war. Men did, but sometimes steel helped them live long enough to try.